was working for this advertising agency, and it was like early December, and that company also went into bankruptcy.
Very few dominoes fall because of inaction. Almost all dominoes in your life fall because of action.
So at that moment, I realized you better have a plan B, and that plan B probably needs to move closer to plan A.
You might not find that mentors there.
I don't care about all these other fancy terminology and all this stuff. How much can I make?
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Leads to Deals podcast, where we're going to talk about everything from leads to deals, and everything that we talk about is going to lead to deals. If you're here, it means that you're intrigued. You want to level up your life, skyrocket your financial success, and master the art of sales and entrepreneurship. This podcast is for you, the go-getters, the deal makers, and the future multimillionaires. If you're here, I know that you're going to give us the feedback that we need, telling us we did a great job by subscribing, by liking, by commenting, and most of all, sharing this episode with your friends and family. Today's episode is sponsored by SynergyData.io. If you're in the REI space, whether it's single family or multifamily, I want you to check out this data-driven website. It's got great AI analytics and seller information. And most importantly, I'm thrilled to announce to today's show my guest, talented young man with great marketing experience from companies like General Motors, Nike, Coors, who's making waves in the multifamily syndication space. He's partnered with a lot of people on over $100 million worth of apartments and consults investors, helping them scale their businesses. Most importantly, he's the host of the Multifamily Insights podcast, and he's great with networking in the Midwest. With that being said, dude, John, thank you for coming on the Leads to Deals podcast, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, man. I'm really excited to be here today and to chop it up with you.
Dude, tell us real quick, the high level for those who don't know you, John. Who is John Casmon today, 2025? What you got going on?
Yeah, man. 2025, you mentioned, we focus on apartment syndication. So we work with busy professionals to invest in real estate without the hassles of being a landlord themselves. We're constantly looking for deals, looking for opportunities to invest and bringing those deals to our investors. Obviously, we didn't start that way. I didn't know what apartment syndication was, had never even heard of the term. But I started my journey in corporate America, like many other folks, working that 9-to-5 job. And a couple of things happened along my way that made me realize that wasn't going to be the path for me. Really, I just didn't control my future. And that came to fruition multiple times. And I made a pivot into real estate. And that ultimately gave me a chance to scale a portfolio.
That's a lot of fancy words for a guy like me. You know, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have known some of that. Walk us through at a high level. Somebody's like, oh God, this guy's doing multifamily syndication. Give us the in the street alley. What does syndication mean?
Yeah. So think of it this way, right? So a lot of your listeners are interested in real estate, trying to find leads and scaling their own personal portfolio. Instead of, let's say, 20 people trying to find their own property and buy it, manage it with a little bit of resources that they have individually, what we do is we take everybody's money, pull it together, and then we go out and buy a larger project. By investing in a larger project, we have scale, we have efficiencies. So let's just say 20 people have $100,000 each. Well, instead of 20 different people searching for 20 different deals, we take all those dollars together. So now we got $2 million. We're going to go out there and maybe buy a $5 or $6 million property. We're going to put in professional property management. Maybe we got a 100-unit building or something like that. And now those of us who have the experience running and managing these properties, we will manage that. Everyone else is more passive, so they get a chance to earn the same kind of returns, or very similar returns that they would get if they were doing it by themselves, but they don't have to do all that work and kind of overcome all of that learning curve on their own.
And this is why I think sales is so powerful, because it's already tough enough to get somebody to sell you their, let's say, single family home. Now we're talking about a massive multifamily asset. But what you're saying is I'm also selling, or at least communicating, to a bunch of people who are otherwise strangers until they get the first deal. Trust me with your money. So it's like you got to sell people on this side from the syndication that I'm a safe haven for your valuable resources. Then you got to negotiate the deal on this side, make sure that they're the ones who want to sell to you. So do you mind if I ask your age, John?
Yeah. 40. What am I? I'm 44 now. I just had a birthday recently. So that might be the first time I've said that out loud.
When did you have your birthday?
It was in December, about a month ago, about 3 weeks ago.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just turned 44 7 days ago.
Oh, wow.
So
There you go. Happy birthday.
we're in this.
Fellow Capricorn.
Thank you. Same to you. Yes, sir. All right. So I know it wasn't always like that. So like you're talking about talking big money. Walk us back through like a little bit in communication, professional sales. When was that? What were you doing first? So now X amount of years later, you're like, I feel comfortable taking people's money and investing it and negotiating deals on their behalf.
Well, it's great you say that, right? Because if you would have told me at any moment before I really got into this that this is what I would be doing, I would have laughed at you. I was a shy kid. I was a kid who wouldn't even order my own food, right? I'd whisper to my dad, hey, can you get me this? And he'd be like, just tell her. And I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to people. So I was very shy as a child. What happened is I kind of got thrown into a couple situations to be a little bit more outgoing, at least be comfortable talking. And you go through different experiences in life and you have no idea how that's going to help you or benefit you later on. Like I used to have a radio show in college, which,
no doubt.
that wasn't something I thought of, but obviously I host a podcast. I'm here with talking to you. Those skills that I developed hosting a podcast came to really help. But to answer your question, I was in corporate America. So I worked in advertising and marketing, worked with some big brands. As a part of that, you have to pitch ideas. You have to understand what clients are looking for. You have to really drive, business results. And we had a lot of great success doing that. However, I worked for GM back in 2008 and 2009. So when we went into bankruptcy, I was front row and center, right? I watched my boss's boss on CNN and Fox News and all these channels. And I had to go sit with them the next day and say, what in the hell is going to go? What's going on, right? What's going to happen to my job, my career? I was part of the team that closed Pontiac, if you remember the Pontiac brand.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of my days stressing out about my future. However, I watched my peers who had been lifers, right? 20 years into this game. They were planning on retiring. It's a great job. They did everything you're taught, right? Go to college, get a good job, retire. Well, they were there. That was their plan. And they didn't have a plan B. So at that moment, I realized you better have a plan B. And that plan B probably needs to move closer to plan A. And that's what got me interested in real estate. But like most real estate investors, I had an issue. I had some money to invest, but not a whole lot. So I would buy a property when we saved up money. And then I would have to wait, a year, 2 years to save up more money. And then I could go out and buy another property. And I kid you not, I was working for this advertising agency and it was like early December. And that company also went into bankruptcy. Completely out of the blue. Like with GM, at least we kind of knew it was leading up for months.
You can watch the TV
it was
and
structured.
See it. Yeah.
We saw it coming. I'm interviewing, right? The market was just, I didn't realize at GM that it was a U.S. economic financial crisis, right? I thought it was my company. And then I realized it was the industry. And then I realized, this is a whole U.S. economic issue. In this situation, the second time around, well, now I've got a few assets, right? I just put down around $130,000 in a down payment for an 8-unit property. And again, like I said, we're saving our money investing. So we saved and invested.
Let me pause real quick. You're in your 30s.
I'm in my 30s.
Is your low 30s, is your first property an 8-unit?
No, we bought a duplex to start. So we started with the 2-unit. We house hacked it, which is a phenomenal strategy. I tell everyone, if you're young, me and my wife. So
okay, gotcha. So that's the team.
If you are renting, the best strategy to get started is to buy a 2 to 4 unit property. You get phenomenal financing, live in one unit, rent out the others. It's a great way to ease into it, to get comfortable managing properties, and you get all the benefits of basically owning real estate without a lot of the headaches of trying to figure out the investing side. With that said, we had a 2-unit, we bought a 3-unit, and we're starting to scale. We just bought this 8-unit building. I think within the next 60 days, my company goes bankrupt. I have very little cash reserves at this point because I put all my money into this 8-unit property and I'm banking on my regular paycheck to kind of keep things going. So this is when I started to really freak out and panic. And I also realized that my strategy of saving all the money I had, once I had enough for a down payment to go out and buy a property, that wasn't going to cut it. Now I've got 2 little kids. I've got 13 units valued at $1.5 million worth of real estate. That sounds great to the outside person. In my mind, all of my equity is tied up in these projects and I can't really tap them. So that's when I started to learn about other strategies. I got a mentor, I started talking to him, and I learned about apartment syndication. And I had to get comfortable talking to people because that was my biggest hurdle was I hear you. I know that other people raise money or do JV deals and things like that.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was for me. One, I didn't come from money like that. I didn't think I knew people who had money like that. I didn't think people would want to invest with me. Who was I, right? I had these 2 properties, but I had never done this before. I wasn't an expert. I kind of got, maybe a little lucky with the timing. I did my first deal in 2012. So I had all these limiting beliefs of why I couldn't go out there and raise capital, why people wouldn't want to invest with me. And what happened with that second company going into bankruptcy is it forced me to realize you better figure something out because you're going to keep sitting here making excuses. You're going to have a whole different life. So At that point, I said, you know what? Why can't I? And my mentor was great. And this is one of the things that I tell people all the time. It is critical to align yourself with partners or mentors or someone who has done what it is you are trying to do. I wasn't necessarily looking for a mentor at that time, but I was looking to network and connect. And I kid you not, like that happened in early December. I think I met him 3 weeks later. And I was here in Cincinnati. A guy named Joe Fearless, huge real estate podcast, best ever, longest running daily podcast, great guy. And at this time, he only had one commercial real estate deal that he had done. But to me, it was intriguing because he and I had the same background. We both were in advertising. We both worked at advertising agencies. And he had made that transition. So I thought to myself, well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. And you have to see that in other people, right? You have to see the pathway. And that was critical. So he kind of taught me how he did things, kind of gave me some of the framework. And that really allowed me to grow and scale. And once I started talking to people, that really made it clear. And the other thing was people were watching me, but I didn't realize it. Or they would say stuff to me like, hey, that's really cool that you bought this property, man. I'd love to do that. And I would just tell them how to do it. And they would never do it. And I would be like, well, why didn't you just do what I told you to do? And I realized, well, they wanted the result. They didn't want to do the work, which is okay when you're raising capital because now I could invite them to join me. But it took all of these steps for me to realize that people would actually want to invest with me if I gave them the opportunity.
Yeah, dude, I think what people need to understand too, you're Cincinnati, right? Like you're Chicago, Cincinnati. What's your mark?
I was in Chicago at the time and I'm in Cincinnati now.
Okay, cool. And so I think a lot of people look at their surroundings and they say, hey, man, but listen, I'm in this market and this is a tough market. And, there's not big deals here. And especially for my guys and gals that are in more urban centers, it's very easy to get lost in the fact of where you look and see there isn't that. You might not find that mentors there, but they're there. You just got to look a little bit harder. And these real estate meetups that you're talking about, they exist in every single, where you're a tier 1 market or a tier 7 market. There's these REI meetups. You can go onto any website, Google that, REI meetups local, and we expect to have newbies there. We expect and we see ourselves in some of these guys and gals that are there. And so, like you said, it's like, there's a difference between the people who say they want to do it and the people that want to do it. And it's getting that, taking that action step, because Cincinnati's no disrespect, in Chicago, those aren't the most pleasant markets. There's some hairy deals. It's not the most friendliest of markets, with all due respect. And so the fact that you were able to find that, it's like, it's words of confidence for other kids who are like, okay, cool. I'm in a really bad situation, but there's still deals going on around you. Big deals. People are making money, and no matter what the neighborhood looks like.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the key, is to figure out where you're at. You can invest in your backyard. You can also invest in other markets. I know a lot of folks who invest across the country. So there's strategies out there based on what it is you do. I would say the other thing that was really important for me was to see it from folks I knew. I had a really good friend who, when I first met her, talking about meetups, she ran a meetup. And that's how I met her. But when I met her, she had one property. She had 3 units, one property. And I would say within about 6 months, she tripled that. And she had 9 units, right? And to me, that was so impressive. She had only bought 2 more properties, but she went from 3 units to 9 units. Keep in mind, I didn't know anybody who invested in real estate, like knew them. I didn't see anybody scale. I read books. I listened to podcasts. I read articles. But to me, those were mythological people. They might have been lying, you have no clue.
Exactly.
So for me to meet someone who was actually doing it was great. Well, I would say within about a year. And I kept going to those meetups because I was committed to this. So I would see her every month. You see some people most months, but typically I would say only about, maybe 10, 20% of the people show up like consistently each month, right? So she and I got to know each other really well because she was the host of the meetup and I would come every month. And through that, we got to talking. And she told me that she had just acquired 90 units. Now, keep in mind, I told you she had 3 units when I met her.
90 units.
She had 3 when I met her, 9 units about 6 months later. And then within a year, she had 90. Now, in my head, that was ridiculous. And I said, well, the only way you can scale like that is if, a grandfather passed away and left you a whole lot of money. So I couldn't shake that point. And I said to her, can I buy you breakfast? I'd like to move this to a different setting. And I want to learn more. So she said, yep. I took her to breakfast and I asked her, I said, how did you go from 9 to 90 units? Fully expecting her to tell me that she had a huge inheritance. And that would be the reason why I couldn't do it. And I can walk away and just feel fine.
Yeah. You almost hope psychologically, you're almost hoping for that release valve.
It had to be something that wasn't applicable or available to me. That was the only conclusion I could come up with. And she told me she had these investors that she had never met, by the way, online, who had been reaching out to her about investing. And she said no for a long time, finally said yes. She went shopping with their money. They did a partnership. She retained equity, gave some equity to them. And now she was able to scale to 90 units. So that's what really got me comfortable and really thinking about raising capital, working with other investors, because I saw her do it. And that's why I say it's so important to network, to have mentors, to talk to people, because that starts to take a notion that seems damn near ridiculous and makes it feasible. When you talk about investing with over 100, we've partnered with investors on over $140 million worth of real estate. That sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud to me, right? Because in my mind, I was a guy saving and crimping and trying to do everything I could to pull up enough money for a down payment for that next 3 unit. So to now talk about hundreds of millions of dollars, it seems like a far reach. But the truth is, there is a process of doing it. You just have to understand what those steps are and then follow that blueprint.
I think this is like a paradigm shift, and it's amazing how the blessings in life. And I think kids don't understand. It's like, one little domino sometimes just falls, and very few dominoes fall because of inaction. Almost all dominoes in your life fall because of action. And so, like, because you went to a meetup, because you did this deal, because you did that, because you asked her to lunch, because you had been pleasant enough that she was willing to take those times, that this whole new universe opened to you. And so I primarily live in the single family world. That's what a lot of my clients do. That's what I meant. But it's really just exposure to the ideas. Because to me, when you say that, I say, oh, wow, well, how did you even decide? Because you always hear it's like, well, I could do one deal and it takes the same amount of effort if I did a 20 unit complex. And so how did you make that decision? And then I want to go into some of the granulars, but to say, hey, single family really isn't my thing, and multifamily is where I want to go, and the larger assets is where I want to go. What light bulbs went off to get to that decision?
So a couple things, right? And that's a really great point, because for most people, they do start a single family and then slowly scale from there. I had the pleasure of being able to read a lot before I made my first investment. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a book that most investors have heard of, if not read, and really, give credit to getting their mind thinking differently about money. Well, there's a follow-up book in that series, which is about real estate investing. And I forgot the book over here somewhere, but it's written by Ken McElroy. And I believe it's the ABCs of real estate investing. In that book, they talk about apartments more. And there's a couple quotes that says, really, I think they have like testimonials and things like that. And everyone says in there, wow, I wish I would have started with apartments first, or I wish I would have moved and scaled to apartments faster. And I'm sure you've heard that from people as well, right?
Yeah, sure.
And I just kept hearing this feedback. And I'm like, well, if everyone always says they wish they would have scaled faster or they started in apartments, why even bother with single family? Why don't we just go straight there? So that's what I did. And again, we started in 2 to 4 units, so it's not like we were buying large complexes. Sure. But in my mind, that made more sense. Keep in mind, I was in Chicago, and in Chicago, 2 to 4 units are prevalent. They're more common than single family homes. Wow. So it made it easier for me to start with 2 to 4 units and then to think about scaling into larger commercial apartments. So for me, I think it was always seated in the information I read, taking those insights from those investors that came before me, and then figuring out how I could apply that to my own investing strategy.
It's something along the lines like a man learns from his own mistakes, a wise man learns from others. Something along those lines. And that's effectively what you're doing. Like you read all these books, you saw a pattern in the comments that they were making on their own reflections and said, okay, I want to model myself after their success that they hit at the end. I can learn from their mistakes. But on that journey, though, there's got to be a part of you, and I say this with love. I was born in Richmond, probably very similar, maybe socioeconomic situations. And if all of a sudden I'm now like, okay, I'm an investor, okay, I'm now asking for money, there's got to be a part of imposter syndrome that comes in to where it's like, you're like, what am I doing? And so walk us through as a young man, even though you're in your 30s, you're established-ish, but it's got to be a vibe to first time you took somebody's money.
Listen, imposter syndrome was huge. You know, it was something that I battled with for a long time. A lot of my clients battle with it, and it's okay. And I tell people all the time, you should be a little nervous, right? Because that
Amen.
means you care. If you're nervous, if you're a little concerned, that means you actually care about these people and you recognize the importance and the trust that they're giving you with their money, right? So that's okay. What I had to do was to reconcile where the imposter syndrome was coming from. And I also had to give myself the ability to recognize what I actually had accomplished. Because what happens is when people are going out there to raise capital, they have a little bit of that imposter syndrome, but they also put too much pressure and weight on the feedback of others, right? So you're in sales, you get it, right? It's a numbers game, right? You talked about that all the time. It's a numbers game. So when you go out to make a sale or you're looking for a property, you have your list and you're going out there and you don't really care if Mrs. Smith sells you her place, right? You hope she does, but if she doesn't, Mrs. Green more than likely will, right? It's a numbers game. And what happens when you're raising capital is it goes beyond the numbers game and it gets emotional, because if Mrs. Smith doesn't want to invest with you, you start to internalize that to Mrs. Smith doesn't think you're good with money, or Mrs. Smith doesn't think that you know what you're doing. Mrs. Smith thinks you're going to fail, right? And now it's a character assassination. And this is all crap you made up in your own head, right? Mrs. Smith didn't say any of that. You just made up this entire narrative based on these people, because now you're talking about people you know, like, and trust already, right? You're not going to some random stranger who owns 123 Elm Street. You're calling a cousin. You're calling your best friend from college. You're calling your friend from high school. You're calling a coworker, right? So now you put more weight on their perception of you based on their feedback. The biggest thing you can do if you are looking to raise capital, and this is why, again, mentoring and training is so important, you've got to shift that paradigm. You are not out there raising capital. In fact, I attract capital. My job is to share the opportunity with people and to educate them. And when they are ready, when they have the information that they need, my job is to be there ready to invest with them. But I'm not trying to sell you on investing with me, right? My job is to teach you why we invest in apartments, why we like apartments, is to tell you who it can help, how it can help you, and then offer you an opportunity. If you've got questions, I want to answer those questions. But we're talking about, our investments are $50,000 and up. So most people are not in a position to just look at, the net worth and net income that most people have. Most people are not in a position to write a $50,000 investment check the time you talk to them. So it may be something that they're leading up to. It may be when they make a switch in their job. It may be other situations. So you can't take that and internalize it. So for me, it's about spreading a wide network, understanding what people are looking for, why our solution helps people, who we're targeting when we talk about this opportunity, and then making sure that we are there and treating it like a service. So we truly try to help people understand what their questions are, who investing is for with us, and all those kind of things. And that makes it a little bit easier. But that took time, because that imposter syndrome will eat at you. And you really have to reshape the way you approach it mentally so that you're not putting all that unnecessary pressure on yourself.
And what you're saying too, to me, it's like the fundamentals of all sales, all this type of entrepreneurship, because you're saying, hey, listen, I don't beg for money. I don't need it. I'm attracting it. It's coming my way. And it's because you're the expert. You're going to educate them. You're going to be able to speak with confidence. And when you speak with confidence, a weird thing happens in all human psychology. The fear of loss is typically stronger than the desire for gain. And so when you're talking about these deals and you're speaking about this opportunity, if you're like, hey, I really could use this because I need you to this, versus you just speaking about it, and it's like, hey, if you want to hop on this bus, you can. But either which way, this bus is going to that destination. that fear of FOMO, as they say, in the crypto space or other spaces, but like that fear of loss, like, oh, man, he's an expert. He's confident in what he's saying. He's going to be successful with or without me. I assume as your confidence has grown and your portfolio has grown, you probably talk less and it's easier to generate capital for your next raise.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it all on the head, right? It's about confidence. And I like to tell people that there are 3 C's when it comes to raising capital, or like you said, attracting capital. The first C is confidence. The key here, though, is that I'm not talking about fake hubris. I'm not talking about faking it until you make it. I'm not talking about just pretending to regurgitate some industry jargon. You actually have to invest the time to know your stuff, right? So read, listen to podcasts, again, get a mentor, educate yourself so that when you speak, you're speaking from the heart, you're speaking from knowledge, you're speaking from, if not your own experiences, the experiences of other investors and other professionals, right? That confidence has to come from preparation. You got to be prepared. So that's the first C. Second C is credibility. Now, if you have an investing experience, lean on that experience. In my case, the first time I did a syndication deal, I had a 13 unit portfolio worth $1.5 million. Some people would say that's great, that's huge. Some people like, that's nothing. That's not on me to judge, but that is the experience that I had. On top of that, I did have my corporate experience. I was a part of the team that led GM out of bankruptcy. I helped Buick become the fastest growing brand in America. I worked on Nike, Coors Light, and Mountain Dew as advertising campaigns. I worked on Super Bowl promotions. So I could lean on my corporate experience, managing teams, managing projects, managing $100 million budgets. That experience gave me some credibility as someone who understood at least a basic sense of business, right? And then on top of that, that last C is connections. Who do you know? Who are you connected to? Who's on your team, right? Who's your mentor? Who are your brokers? Who are your property managers? Like, who have you been able to assemble around you, and who do you know? That's going to carry a lot of weight. So if you're looking to attract capital, it's that confidence, it's the credibility, and it's the connections. Those 3 anchors are going to help you see success.
I think about the word syndication. And like, to me, that's a fancy word, and it sounds like it's legal, and it sounds like there's all these like requirements and federal registrations. And I really don't know because I'm not too well inside of that world. But I'm curious, what is the difference between, having an official syndication, why you go that route versus just some private money lenders? And is there a difference between, I got Bob, he's a multimillionaire, he owns a bunch of condos in downtown Chicago. He said, anytime you want to draw against us, I want 8%, and here's $5 million sitting here. Something along those lines. What's the difference? Walk us through that for our audience.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And you're right. So syndication can certainly be, legalese and somewhat concerning. The first thing is this: if someone is investing passively, truly passively, then it's a security. And if they don't have the ability to control the investment decisions and they're investing for equity, then it's a security. So it has to be a syndication. And there's certain SEC documents you have to go through for that. Now, if someone's not getting equity and it's a loan, so you talk about a private money lender, if it's a loan, you can certainly do that, right? So I can go to, like I said, private money guy, and if they want to give me $5 million and, it's a 3-year loan, whatever it is, certainly that is not a syndication. So the equity is the first thing. Is there equity or is there not equity? If there's equity involved and they're going to participate in the upside, then that would be a syndication. If there's no equity, then it's a loan, right? The challenge with the loan is you obviously have to pay that back, and there's the terms that come with that. Sure. So with the loan, that's pressure on the deal. So if I have, let's just say someone says they want 8%, but maybe they want 2 or 3 points on top of that, right? That's on top of whatever my primary loan is or the senior debt to the deal. So I have to then factor that in. It could be more beneficial for me as an investor because I would retain 100% of the equity in that scenario, but the time frame is also important. So the thing with our deals, we typically buy what's called value add multifamily deals. And what that means is we're buying properties that are already making money. So they're fine, they're operating, but we have a vision to make that property make more money. So picture just buying any other business, right? There's a business that exists, but you've got some great approach to help that business be more profitable. So you're going to buy it based on the value today and what it's doing today, but you have a vision to generate more profits. With our deals, the challenge is we're going to need, typically 3 to 5 years to drive that value because it's already 90-95% occupied. We don't want to kick everybody out, spend millions of dollars day one and, try to sell. Like, it's more of a slow grind, almost like regular rentals. So when people move out, that's when we're going to renovate that unit and push up rents. So that's going to take, a year, 2, maybe 3 years to really implement that based on the business plan and based on the market and what you're trying to do. So because of that, the private money side gets hard because you've got to exit those guys, and sometimes the market's not ideal. So it just, the timing of it becomes a little tricky. With the equity investors and the syndication, there's not really the pressure to rush to do that. We're going to do that at our own pace. So if the market makes sense in year 3, great. If it makes sense in year 5, that's fine too. But we control that process. When you have that private money lender or someone who, has kind of the terms where it's, they're wanting their money, they typically want their money back at that moment. With syndication, one of the things that we're always asking investors, and this is why the education is so important, it's not an illiquid investment. You can't put your money in and call me 6 months later and say, hey, man, I actually found something else I want to do. I need my money back. That's not how this works. So we tell everybody, here's our vision. Here's the business plan. Here's how long we expect to be in the deal, but it could go longer. It could be shorter. If they're comfortable with that time frame, that's when we move forward with the investment. So there's a little bit more, flexibility that's required to be in a syndication deal, but those investors get all the perks of actually owning the real estate. So they get all the tax benefits that come with it. They get the pass-through income. They get, they get all the perks of owning real estate without the headaches of being a landlord. When you do private money lending, you don't get those perks of ownership. You don't get the depreciation. You don't get some of those other things. So that's one of the reasons a lot of investors like the syndication side.
When I first got into the REI space, John, I was on the acquisition single family. This is a couple of years ago. I stumbled into your guys' whole world. And I was like, okay, this is great. Like, I'll strong arm on the acquisition side. We'll have good conversations, build extreme value and exchange value for equity, getting great direct to seller deals. And then I was like, and then it'll be easy to disposition to all these local mom and pop buyers. In my head, I was thinking, okay, these are just going to be your average plumbers who got into this. And then I realized, the real savages are on this side. Like, if I don't have a strong disposition agent, they will devour them. They will drive our asking price down because they know the properties so well. And so these guys are super, super aggressive. So I'm curious with you, John, as you started structuring your first few deals, like, did you, now that you know something different now, did you just kind of eat dirt on a couple of deals where you structured it differently than you would have now, overly advantageous, either on error or maybe even on purpose in the beginning for the person providing funds?
So, the point you made cannot be underscored enough. The thing I tell everybody, the biggest difference to me, outside of the scale and the numbers with single family or residential investing and commercial investors are professional investors. So they only really care about the numbers, right? On the residential side, you can find someone who falls in love with the neighborhood or the finishes or, the house, right? And they just see their family being raised in that home, and they may be willing to pay a little bit more than what your numbers suggest or what your neighbor paid.
Yep.
Commercial real estate, everybody's a dog. So they only care about the profits. They only care about the vision. They only care about how much they can make. And you're not going to get bailed out by, that person who's going to fall in love. So you've got to be tight on your numbers going into it. You've got to have that disposition plan, understand your exit, and you've got to factor in these things. And I will tell you, we have been fortunate in that sense where we haven't had to, eat dirt from that standpoint. However, we have absolutely seen a lot of scenarios, and the market's shifting now where a lot of investors are starting to run into some trouble with their deals, particularly because interest rates have changed over the last couple of years. But for us starting out, I would say the biggest thing was just understanding the complexity of multifamily from a financing standpoint and, bridge debt versus fixed debt and, when do rates, switch, just terms I wasn't really familiar with. Taxes are really big. So you have to pay attention to taxes. Insurance has just ballooned over the last couple of years. So when you're buying these properties, you really are buying a business. And that's, again, a difference between the residential side. We're buying it as a business. We're treating it like a business. We're forecasting 3 to 5 year, projections and formulas. When I did do some single family stuff, we never did that kind of forecasting, right? I bought it. What are the rents? What is this? All right, how much can I make? Boom. Like, I had no idea what year 3 was going to look like. We didn't project that far, But in this case, we're projecting to a 5-year or 7-year exit. So I've got a sense of, what's the growth rate going to be for rents? What is inflation going to be? Like, what's our annual, expenses? At what point is the taxes going to get reassessed? You've got to factor all these things in. And when you're doing that, if you make a mistake, particularly a large mistake, that could have colossal impact on your financials and your ability to turn profits for you and your investors.
I think about today's interest rates, right? And like I'm somewhat plugged in, and I work with a refi company, and we assist them in targeting people who need loans. And there's always a need for any product for the most part. But I know I see a contraction in a lot of things out there. I feel like the seller, at least on the residential side, the seller psychology has finally caught up more or less to the trend of the industry. There was a gap about a year ago where they still thought everything was perfect and that everybody was going to pay over. And right now, I literally just ran a stat for my team. Out of the top 15 markets, 12 out of the 15 had more than a 25% reduction in listing prices month over month. So in other words, 1 out of 4 properties in all major markets had a reduction in listing price because they're just sitting on there longer than they were 4 months ago. And a lot that's a reflection of how much harder it is to get a loan and the interest rates, et cetera. So walk me through in your world what today's interest rates mean to you, mean to your investors, than compared to 2 years ago. What has changed?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it, right? It's that cost of capital is how we think of it, is having a significant impact. So first of all, in commercial real estate, the way we value properties is based on how much income they're producing. So we call that the net operating income. So you take all of the current income, all of the current expenses, that's going to be your net operating income. So based on that NOI and based on the location and the demand in the area, we call that the cap rate. We're going to use the NOI divided by the cap rate, and that's going to be your value or what the property should be worth. Well, that's great if you're paying all cash. Most investors, again, in this commercial space, everyone's trying to squeeze out all the profit they can. So most people know, hey, but if I go get a loan and I use some leverage, I can make even more money. So now you factor in the cost of capital. So that NOI is important, but what we really care about is cash flow. So NOI, we got to figure out the debt service. So how much are we paying in our mortgage? Sure. And then we also have to figure out our capital expenses as well. But primarily NOI minus our debt service, that's going to be the cash flow. That's how much money we're actually going to make on our investment. Well, that debt service has shot up drastically. In a few years ago, you could get loans in the 3% range or a low 4% range. Now you're looking at high 6s, mid 6s, 7s, that maybe even 8% range. Mm-hmm. So if that cost of capital has gone up 25 to 50%, you're just not going to make the same returns because us as investors, we really don't care about all that. Like what we care about is if I invest $100,000, how much am I going to make? It's as plain as simple as that, right? I don't care about all these other fancy terminology and all this stuff. How much can I make? And if I can double my money over a 5-year period, that is an attractive offer for many people. So that's kind of what you're looking for. That's much harder to do today than it was a couple of years ago. So now you can either look to accept a lower return, or you're going to look elsewhere for your investing needs. And then you start to factor in, okay, well, what does the exit look like? What happens if interest rates stay high? What happens if there's less demand to buy these apartments in the future? What happens if people can't pay their rents and vacancy shoots up? So now you have all these other operational factors, not to mention getting interest rates shooting up, insurance shooting up. So it's harder just to operate these properties. They're not making as much money. The cost of capital has gone up. And on top of that, there's been an influx of new construction over the last 24 months. We've actually seen more new construction and supply come online over the last 24 months than we had in the last 40 years. So this is...
I just saw that stat, yes.
Yeah. So this is really this kind of crazy mixture of different factors. And that's why a lot of operators are starting to see some challenges in their deals today. That's also going to create a lot of opportunities for those investors as well. So we're definitely seeing a lot of change. Investors are starting to come to grips with where the market is today, why investors aren't willing to pay what they were willing to pay maybe 2 years ago, and also recognizing just some of these factors that are driving the market.
It sounds like a really potential for a melting pot to go sideways, because if rental rates drop aggressively, but interest rates stay high, then you guys are caught between a rock and a hard place. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing to remember here is that real estate, just like everything else, this is all, market dependent. So I'll tell you, here in the Midwest, we're actually not seeing those trends as drastically because we didn't see as much new supply, and there is still a housing shortage all throughout the country. So you have some um, some temporary inflections in some markets where so much new supply came online over the last 12 to 18 months that is starting to have an impact and rents are starting to come down. I read something, I think Austin is like leading the way with rent reduction.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you look at the new supply that's forecast over the next 18 to 24 months, there's very little in the pipeline because interest rates shot up so high. Developers are not going out there and taking on new projects. So it should balance out here over the next 18 to 24 months as well. So it's a really weird mix to pay attention to. And that's why you have some investors who are trying to hang on and they're just trying to survive to, they jokingly say survive to 25. But some folks are trying to do that. Some folks are seeing the opportunity in the marketplace. Some sellers are just now getting burned out because if you think about it, almost for the last 5 years, from COVID hitting to the interest rates starting to change, we've been in this space where folks have realized, hey, is now really a good time to sell or should I hold on? After a while, you're just tired and burned out. If you own a 20-unit building and you've had it for 15 years and you kind of really wanted to sell it 5 years ago, but COVID hit and that kind of threw off your plans. Well, now you're at a place where you're like, I just want to be done. I just want to move on. I want to do something else completely. So we are starting to see some of those owners who say, you know what? I'm willing to accept what the market determines the value of this property is today.
I think about a guy like you with your experience and knowing where you started out and hearing that. And I say, man, I bet you there's so many people who have a network, their own close network. And it's almost like anything in sales, like you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Yep. And 80% of all closers don't even ask for the sale. They just want for people. So it's like, you have in your network all the pieces for a lot of people who are already just somewhat in the REI space to be able to replicate this. Like, hey, I have access to capital, I have access to knowledge, I'm in a healthy market, or I have knowledge of how to get to a healthy market. But then the question becomes is, how do you source the deals? So what's a strategy or two that you can give people, John, as like, okay, you got all this, now let's talk about acquisition.
Yeah, acquisition is key, right? So it depends on the size of the deal. I would say when you're going into the larger assets, so think 75 units and up, the reality is, again, these are sharks. These are very savvy business owners, right? So they're not going to be as willing to sell for, cents on the dollars because they don't have to typically, right?
Exactly.
Typically, they're in a great situation. They would sell. And the irony is they will answer your phone call because to them, they don't have a connection to this property. It's money. If you give them the right offer, they're happy to sell, right? So
great point.
They are less tied to the property, but because of that, they're also more tied to the profit or the business plan or what happens next. So it's harder to go out there and cold call or directly source these larger deals. So for that, we do work with brokers. Brokers are actually doing a lot of those techniques themselves. They're the ones reaching out to these owners trying to figure out, hey, what's your plan? When do you think you want to sell? Are you interested in knowing how much value it is today? They're having all those conversations to figure out who actually is interested in selling. So I would say
pocket listings? Are these pocket listings?
Some of them are pocket listings. Some are fully marketed. It just depends on that owner. So when an owner is committed to selling, they want to get the best price. So they're going to blast it out. And maybe it's a guy in California or New York who is looking for a 1031 exchange and his property fits their billing. Or maybe there's a group who, they're private equity groups who have to place capital. So they're going to blast it out, to find that best owner. But there's some who are not looking to do that. And there could be a multitude of reasons where they want it to be more, subdued. And they may say, hey, you know what, if you think you have a buyer, then you can share this with them, but I don't want to see this marketed everywhere. So in that case, they may reach out to someone like me and say, hey, John, I've got this guy. He's got a 100-unit building in this area that I think you like. Here's some numbers. Take a look. And if you're interested, we can submit an offer. So there are deals like that. So we definitely work with the brokers on the larger stuff just because they're more in tune. And those owners, they're sophisticated. Like if I call them, they're not trying to entertain, some random dude. Like it doesn't matter how much background you have. I'm a random dude to them. So developing a relationship helps if we can get to know them. Then if I really have a relationship with them, then when they're ready to sell, maybe they're willing to talk to me. But that broker relationship is going to be key. On the smaller side, and I'm saying smaller is like 50 units and below, I think you can go direct to owners because now you're talking about more of a mom and pop owner. It's a couple that's on this asset for maybe 20 years. You do need to establish that relationship a little bit. So it's not going to be maybe as quick as a residential building, but you can do that. I'll give you an example. One of my clients, he came across a deal and he asked me to help and partner with him. So I did. But he came across a 54-unit complex in North Carolina. And they had reached out to this owner previously and they weren't ready to sell. About a year later, after just staying in touch for a year, they reached out and said, hey, you know what? I'm ready to sell this smaller property. They went through, did that transaction. I think it was like a 3-unit. And then he said, you know, I actually have this 54-unit that I think I want to sell too. Are you interested? And they said, absolutely. So he called me. We kind of went through the numbers. Everything looked great. And we ended up closing on that deal. But that took a year, right? It took a year for them to get ready, for them to get comfortable, for them to go through kind of maybe a baby transaction with the team to get comfortable with them. And at that point, they were ready to make that transaction. Could they have gotten more money if they hired a broker and had it listed and blasted everywhere? Absolutely. They would have made more money or at least gotten a higher offer. My counter to that point, though, is typically a broker is going to charge anywhere between 3 and 6% on that transaction fee. You don't know who those buyers are going to be. Maybe they get under contract and now they want to beat you down to the prices you kind of talked about. Maybe you have a bunch of people walking through and tenants get concerned. So they start moving out because, hey, there's a bunch of new owners that are going to come in and jack up the rents. So you have a lot of other factors that come into play that may not make sense to your average investor. But when you own a property, especially when you self-manage, they are really focused on ease of ownership. So yes, I can make an extra $20 if I increase the rent $20 a month. But for them, it's not worth it. Because if that person decides to leave, that's a lot more work for them. It's going to cost them more money to fix up that unit. They would rather just keep that person. So they don't do those little things to drive the value as much, which creates opportunities for investors like us.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine, and we've partnered on a couple of self-storage deals, but he's always sourced them and done everything from the underwriting. But I was watching his IG yesterday, and this is on a deal that I'm not involved with, but he was talking about how this person had $80,000 currently on the books of like past due payments and people that have been there for 3 years that they just have a good heart and it's an older, smaller town and they're letting these people stay and et cetera, et cetera. And so for him, dealing with the non-institutional self-storage facilities, the smaller ones, like you're saying, the 40 doors, the 30 doors, the 20 doors, multifamilies, that's a lot of times it may be unsophisticated. I don't mean that they're not more smarter about it than I am, but they're just not, like you said, they're in it for, it gives us a return. I have an easy, peaceful life. They're going to look at it differently. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there, even today in this space, that I think a lot of my followers and listeners who are in the single family, you're already doing 4-door and less anyways, stepping it up that data sheet and talking to the non-LLC held properties, the ones that are in somebody's personal name and or the smaller property units. It's a great opportunity, I still think, to this day.
Yeah, and I think there's a point you made that is really key. Like we talk about, sophisticated, and it's certainly not to discredit these owners. We got to keep in mind, like these owners have usually accomplished their goal with that asset, right? They bought this property maybe to walk away from a corporate job, whatever it is. And if they've had it 20 years, it's done that for them. They've made their money, over and over on that asset. They've got equity. So they're good. What they may not have done is developed a disposition strategy. So now they may be in a place where they've owned this thing for 20 years. They don't really know what to do with it. Maybe the kids don't want it. And, they're just doing it because that's what they've been doing. So they are interested in selling, but they maybe haven't even thought of selling because they haven't been approached properly, right? So it's not to think that we're taking advantage of these people or anything like that. Sure. The truth of the matter is, for them, they've accomplished their goal. They're doing what they wanted to do. And now it's a matter of what's next for them. And if we can create that opportunity or help them with that transition, that creates a win-win situation for us as investors and them as owners.
That's the power of follow-up too, man. It's always time and circumstance. Like you're not, some will, some won't, so what? Like that'll get you through everything in sales. But if you're treating them all the same and you have the same follow-up process and you're just treating them like human beings, the ones that will, you want to be there, or your hand's already pre-raised for it. So dude, I can see why you make the complex simple, John. And so that's what I've loved about this. And I really like about your podcast, which is Multifamily Insights Podcast. And in detail, I've caught a couple of episodes, but that's what you're doing. You're helping people educate themselves about this asset class. Before we go, I did have one last lingering question, though. I know you're doing multifamily. If you were to be forbid, wave a magic wand, what other asset class would you particularly go into with the knowledge that you have right now, what else are you interested in?
That's a great question. So for a little context, I mentioned I was in marketing before this. So understanding trends and insights and all those things are really, really important to me. So with that in mind, there are a couple of asset classes I would pay close attention to. And one I'm actually actively looking into and will probably invest in very shortly here. So the first one's going to be senior living. Okay. So this is going to be senior assisted living. There's senior care. There's different levels to it, 55 plus communities. The reason for that is, and I believe this number is still accurate, there are 10,000 people that turn 65 every day in this country. So there's a silver tsunami is what they're calling it. So these people, they're aging more gracefully than maybe what we would have thought, when we think about what grandparents look like or retirees look like. So they need different things. They need communities. They need a little bit of assistance, but they also need it to be affordable. And for a lot of us, you and I, we just talked about being the same age, right? Well, our parents are starting to get into that age and starting to, we got to watch them and monitor them and figure out what we're going to do with them. Are we putting them in retirement homes? Do we want them in a better care facility? So this is something we actually had to look into for my wife's mother, where we started to figure out, okay, she needs a little more assistance than just being by herself, but we don't want to send her to a nursing home. So can we get her in a home where there's just someone who comes in and kind of assist a little bit? That is a huge exploding landscape. So still similar to multifamily, but you could do it with residential. So you can buy a house. You can put, up to 10 people in one house. Lots of opportunity there. The other is affordable housing. So still, again, multifamily adjacent, but affordable housing is becoming a huge issue. Again, we don't have enough housing in this country. The rents have shot up drastically. So finding affordable housing solutions is something that I think is really, really important. The one that's not really tied to living is self-storage. So self-storage to me was always intriguing. I guess I always question, is that really necessary? Do people have this much stuff? Yes. Yes, they do. Yep. I don't know why, but yes, they do. And so that's an asset class. And the reason I love that asset class is the simplicity of the infrastructure. So you're talking about kind of, metal boxes, basically, with some locks. You don't have plumbing typically. You don't have you have a little bit of electricity, but not much electricity. There's no tenants. If someone doesn't pay rent, you go ahead and give them 30-day notice and you confiscate that unit. You don't have some of the bureaucracy and regulatory restrictions that you have when it comes to housing. So that's really intriguing to me as well. So if I were looking at things outside of multifamily, for me at least, based on the trends, and you can look into the data a little bit more, but I will look at senior housing, I will look at affordable housing, and then I will look at self-storage.
Wow. Bars. All right, cool, John. I appreciate it, man. We can go on to every major platform to find your Multifamily Insights podcast, correct?
Yes, you can.
All right, cool. Do you have an IG or any place else that the guys can follow you, or is the podcast the best?
I'm really active on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, just John Casmon, you'll find me there. On IG, JCASMON is my handle. So at J Casmon is the handle. So find me there as well.
Dude, I love hearing about your journey, getting to know you a little bit better. For everybody out there, he started just like all of us, didn't know anything about it, and built up his network, took steps, took action, communicated authoritatively, even kind of stepped out ahead of where his experience was and projected that confidence. And I think that what you've done is super, super impressive, man. So thank you for coming on here and sharing this journey. And I hope everybody checks out the Multifamily Insights podcast and hits you up on LinkedIn. Thank you for your time, John.
Thank you.
All right, you're very welcome, brother.